Welcome, everyone, to another 2023 mock draft here at Blogging the Boys YouTube channel. I am Brandon Loree, your host for these little episode series, and you can follow me on Twitter at Brandon is right. This episode, this time around, I have one of my great friends, one of the great writers at Blogging the Boys, Mr. Tony Catalina, and we are not writing here. We're going to be conversing about what the Cowboys should do here at pick number 26 and beyond. And you guys can actually listen to Tony every Monday on the First and 10 podcast at the Blogging the Boys podcast network with his co-host Aiden Davis. And Tony, the draft is finally less than a week away. For sickos like us, I know it's a terrible word, but for sickos like us who follow the sport 365 all year round, this is sort of like second Christmas for us, right?
I mean, I'm so pumped up, honestly. I just been waiting for it, right? It's felt like a long off season, even though it really isn't a long off season because the NFL never lets you get time off. But I'm just ready to root for the Cowboys for the first time in what, like 3 or 4 months now. So I'm excited for the draft.
Yeah, a lot of teams are getting ready. You know, the offseason workouts are starting in certain teams. I know the Cowboys are starting to do a little bit. So it does feel like that the turning of the page for 2023 is officially here. And once again, this is Tony Catalina's mock draft. We did one with David Howman. We did one with Mike Poland. And we're going to do one with Tony. And I think that Tony brings a very unique perspective when it comes to the draft. And we will get that starting with his top three positions of need. So, Tony, for you, where the Cowboys need to go, kind of fill, they've done a lot with regards to free agency and acquisitions to kind of plug a lot of holes. That's sort of been the common theme throughout these mock drafts. But what do you think are the three most glaring needs right now entering next Thursday?
For me, I mean, it's one of those things where, I'm on record saying that they've handled free agency really well. So they found a way to kind of mask up their needs and kind of attack this offseason so they wouldn't have too many glaring holes. But if you look at the three positions for me, I think it's some easy ones. And I think it's guard. I think it's, offensive guard specifically. I think it is linebacker. And then if you want to look at it, I would think, it's funny. I'm not going to tip my hand here. It may not happen, but I think we need to figure out a kicker. I think
Yeah.
we have to find a kicker situation here. So, I mean, those are the first three that come to my mind.
Yeah, definitely. I think kicker is the one that, and listen, Tristan Vizcaino, great guy, probably awesome dude, but you want a little bit of competition. You know, sometimes things need to be forged in fire a little bit. Talking about your draft philosophy, you had an article that came out where you were talking about pretty much like a best case scenario for the Cowboys might be to trade back. Is that sort of your philosophy kind of entering this draft where there's not a lot of blue chip talent at the top and the Cowboys can maybe acquire a little bit more draft capital, on the back end? Where are you at right now and sort of how you want to attack this draft?
It's every year is unique, right? Because in some instances, you're like, okay, you're in a top half of the draft, so let's go attack, some of the best players in this draft. If you're talking the top 16, you're like, okay, we're gonna get a really good football player. Let's not mess this up. But when you're a good football team like the Dallas Cowboys are, and you're in the back end, you're kind of at the mercy of the board a little bit. So you kind of sit there and you assess where you're at. Then you kind of build your board and see what tags you have up there and who's touching. And when it gets to into the 20s, you're like, okay, we have three or four, maybe five guys that we really like. Do we want to trade back? And still, it's a little bit of a gamble, but you can acquire some assets and possibly still get a guy that you really value. So this is why Will McClay in the front office make the big bucks because they got these decisions to make. But to answer your question directly, I'm a best player available type of guy. But in this year, 2023 for the Cowboys, it's tough for me not to sit here and say, hey, maybe a trade back would be advantageous.
I like that, and the article was well written. Everybody needs to go check it out, especially if your team trade down. But I think where the teams are sitting at like the teens, the 12s to 15, they're sort of at the mercy of this draft where there's not a lot of high end talent. You get a little bit more value towards the back end where the contracts are significantly less. When the Cowboys pick at 26, whoever they draft there, if they do, that's going to be less salary than if you take a player at 12. That's just how it works with the draft. So I think just the way it works out, you might see a lot more trades where people want to trade back, acquire more capital, and just get really that third day, maybe even late second, where you get as much talent as possible, where the value is really there. Because you look at the wide receiver class, something that a couple other the writers brought up, where there's not a lot of great wide receivers, but if you go into that second and third day, that's where you can kind of get some plus starters, and the value is still pretty high.
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt, that's the thing, right? I think you touched on it perfectly. Like, yeah, there may not be as many blue chippers as we're used to seeing at the top here, but that doesn't mean that this draft is, absent of talent. So finding it, and that's why I think, in that article you reference, I talk about trading back with somebody. If the Chiefs specifically is who I talked about,
Yeah.
but if anybody in the back end is willing to move up a little bit, I see the value in having as many top 100 picks as you can get, because those are the guys that you're hoping can make it, if not an immediate impact, but a pretty damn, near quick impact on your team. And I think that with this draft not being so top heavy, you might be able to really build a strong draft class if you have as many of those guys as you can.
Well, let's take that fire, that energy that we got going right now, and let's get it into the draft. Just like we've been doing, we got our board up here. We're gonna pick all the 7 picks for the Cowboys. They mapped it out perfectly where we don't have to have this weird number. It's just rounds 1 through 7. No trade backs in this scenario. Again, we're just gonna go through and pick the players who are available that Tony likes. So we're gonna get started here, and we have it on turbo mode like we always do, because no reason to waste any time here. Um, so it looks like, and I've been saying this, Tony, and I'm not sure if you agree. I think the Giants are going to be a pain this entire draft. I don't know if it's a case where maybe the Eagles trade up and pick in front of the Cowboys and trade back with the Giants, like the Cowboys did with the Eagles, and the Giants didn't get Devonta Smith in the 2021 draft to almost like get back at the Cowboys. But it seems like whoever the Cowboys want, I feel like the Giants are going to take in front of them, and we see this here. Brian Branch, somebody that they've been looking at. Quentin Johnston went to the Jaguars. I know that's somebody that you're pretty high on. Kalijah Cansey, Zay Flowers, Bijan went to Pittsburgh. I don't know if that really makes a whole lot of sense with Najee Harris, but again, it's not a perfect science. Teams look at the value. Any sort of position you want to take a look at first as we're getting started with number 26?
First off, the first thing I'm looking at, right? I mentioned guard, right? So I'm gonna kind of map this out, out loud with you. I look at guard, I look at wide receiver and cornerback as some things that, like, if you got a top tier first round talent, Stephon Gilmore and Brandon Cooks aren't stopping me from building those rooms, because we see injuries happen, and the more talent you have on the edge, the better. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm kind of looking at it here. As we look at it, I see we got Emmanuel Forbes there, Osiris Torrance. It's kind of set up for us in a good manner. So if you don't mind, I know you're running the board there. Can you put like the overall? I just want to see who's the best players available.
Let's
Now, and
see.
that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to pick them here, but I look at
Miles
a-
Murphy's there, and that's
yeah.
a name where I've seen a lot of people recently drop him down in mock drafts. People who are very plugged in. I feel like his gap for this draft could be maybe in the top 10. Maybe he's picked number 10 to the Eagles, or he could be maybe to the Chiefs. Because of course they need defensive end help. I know the one thing about him is just he has like the smallest hands ever recorded for a defensive end at the combine. But to me, that wouldn't knock him down. And he's almost like a DeMarcus Lawrence clone. So for me, that's a name that sticks out as well. You have Brian Brisset, Will McDonald. That's another name as well. Michael Mayer, 2 players that seem to be connected with the Cowboys as we get close. So any of these names kind of stick out to you?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned I'm honestly, like I said, I'm gonna flesh this out publicly here. What I'm looking at is I always lean onto best player available, best position available. So as I'm sitting here, I'm kind of looking at, battling between Anton Harrison, because it fits that, tackle
Mm.
position. What do you feel about Tyron Smith? How are they going to use Tyler Smith? Where's Terrence Steele in his progression? But I think Miles Murphy, despite his little hands, I think Miles Murphy is just too good of a value there. So I think if you want to lock me in a Miles Murphy, I'd be okay with that.
I like that. I'm not going to fight you on that one. I know RJ wants a little bit of chaos and destruction between the two of us in our relationship, but that's not going to happen here. I think it's a great pick, and honestly, if he is there, I don't think that's a player that the Cowboys would expect to be there at that point. And you wonder if maybe they would prefer somebody like Will McDonald over Miles Murphy, somebody who's a little bit more of a bendy, twitchy type defensive end player, someone that Dan Quinn has seemed to covet right now. But again, we'll leave that up to them. I think that they'll take some notes away from what we got going on. Again, when you look at the board and how it sits, Trenton Simpson goes to the Giants, the pick before us in the second round. Sam Laporta to the Detroit Lions. Josh Downs, a wide receiver from North Carolina. Matthew Bergeron, that's another player that the Cowboys seem to like as well. Luke Musgrave, the tight end. Keanu Benton, the defensive tackle, went to Detroit as well. So we are still looking at offensive guard as a need that you kind of came into this. Is that where you want to take a look at right now and see who's available?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously want to take a peek there and see what the value looks like. Obviously, if we can kind of organically take out
Oh,
a need, yeah, it's for me. I mean, we can for the sake of the show, we can take a little look here, but I think we can lock in a guard from TCU if you don't mind. But let's take a little look here and see if there may be something better. In a world, yeah, I don't think the Cowboys are going to play around if that man is still there in the second round.
so Tyreek Stevenson is still there as well, to a corner. I know that's another position that you mentioned at the top. Linebacker seems like kind of, well, yeah. Man, this draft is working out a lot better than the other ones that we did. I'm looking at the top three here. All players that the Cowboys could really use. Deion Henley, the linebacker out of Washington State. Some people don't like him because he's a little bit smaller, a little undersized, but he has a tenacity that not many linebackers in this class play with. I like him a lot. He has a nose for the football. I mean, either one, either three, if there's another position. But I think, like you said, there's sort of a blinking light right here. But again, this is your mock draft. I'll let you decide.
Yeah, it's it's funny. We're sitting here, we're looking at the top 3 guys available. If this is reality for the Cowboys, I think they're sitting here feeling really good about what they got in front of them. But you gotta lock away the guard, and that's a plug and play at left guard here. So Steve Avila out of TCU is my pick.
I like it, man. So far, Miles Murphy and Steve Avila. I don't think that anybody would be upset with that. And you look, like you said, in a perfect world, if that's the case. I mean, we're already doing somersaults on draft night, so I'm all in favor of that. Where do you want to go next for round three?
I want to look at the cornerback, but I'm a little nervous with Hodges Tomlinson because he's a little bit on the smaller side, and we know how Dan Quinn feels about the size and the length at the cornerback spot. So while I think Tomlinson would be a good pick, I don't know if that's what the Cowboys would do. So I think if we can kind of scroll down here and see what we got available. I mean, I'm quarterback. I'm not looking at that. Kind of looking. I mean, I'm interested in Michael Wilson, and I probably would have taken a look at Carter if we didn't already kind of hit that in the first round, but man, listen, there is some guys still out there. I mean, you look at Jamie Robinson too. A.T. Perry's got the freakish size. Um,
Do you want to take a look at running back and
yeah,
see?
let's take a look at it. It can't
Okay.
hurt because that's definitely something that we should address eventually.
So let me see running back and tight end. So we have McBride, Bigsby, Schoonmaker, Kendre Miller, somebody that the Cowboys have done extensive research. Tyjae Spears is still there as well. Sean Tucker. So it looks like a lot of the guys that the Cowboys would want. I don't know if they'll last until the fourth round of Roshan Johnson, but you have your pick here. But if we want to go to the big board, we can go back to the big board.
Yeah, so I look at the names and kind of how I feel about it here is there are definitely some guys that the Cowboys want to take, but with so many that I feel comfortable with there, I might gamble and see if I can get one of those guys in the fourth. So if you want to take a look at the big board here, we might be able to attack, a best player available situation. And I think if we can get Michael Wilson in there, I think I'd be cool with that.
You want to do that? Lock in Michael
Yeah,
Wilson?
yeah,
All
lock
right.
it in.
Let's do that. Now, where do you think he would start on the depth chart? You figure the Cowboys are still trying to figure out what they have in Jalen Tolbert, who was ironically drafted in the third round last year. The Cowboys 2 years in a row in this mock draft taking some wide receiver depth. Where would he slide? Would he be sort of at, kind of base level with a Jalen Tolbert? Could he be competing a little bit more for Michael Gallup snaps? Where would that be?
Well, he's a third round pick like Jalen Tolbert is. So in this situation, you don't promise him anything. You like the potential, you like what he can possibly bring to this offense, but just like anybody else here, you don't want to put too much of expectations on him. See if you can go out there and compete for maybe that fourth job. I think we know 1 through 3 is pretty set, unless something funky happens with Michael Gallup. But there are probably 3 or 4 legitimate guys fighting for that fourth roster spot. Simi Fahoko, I wrote an article about there's some guys here that could really compete. So I think you would fit right in that mix.
Yeah, you brought up the back end of the roster, the former Cleveland Brown wide receiver. The name is escaping me right now.
Antonio Callaway.
Yes, yes. I kept wanting to think Antonio Gibson, but I know that's the running back for Washington. But
Yeah.
he's a burner. I mean, he has that similar skill set to what they would have in Jalen Hyatt if they drafted him. But he has more experience. He has more proven success at the NFL level. It's more of off the field and why he's kind of bounced around. But that's a guy that honestly, when you brought that up, he's such an intriguing name because he's stuck around. The
Yeah.
Cowboys brought him back as somebody that they wanted to keep on the practice squad, keep developing. So I agree with that. Looking where we stand right now, Zach Kuntz, the tight end from Old Dominion, big guy. He went to Kansas City. They get to pair him up with Travis Kelce. That just does not seem fair. Dwayne McBride, the running back who we were talking about, went to Seattle. Noah Sewell, he went to the Commanders. Corey Trice, another name that John Owning brought up as somebody that the Cowboys could, look at if they wanted to. I don't know what the interest level is, but that's a player who seems to be pretty good. Zach Evans, the running back out of Mississippi. Shoemaker. So we might still have a few of the running back names if you wanted to take a look at that.
Yeah, let's you know what, like how you pulled up last time. Let's look at the running backs and the tight end, see kind of what that looks like. It's I'll be honest with you, they kind of wiped out the running backs a little bit more than I thought they were going to there.
Yeah.
In this situation. So I think people maybe kind of beat us to the punch there. But I know he's not a big guy, but he's an explosive guy. I'm really interested in Deuce Vaughn there, unless we can find a better situation. Maybe if you want to pull up the best players available. I don't know how much further we want to push out running back at this point,
Yeah.
but man, you know what? I'm comfortable locking Deuce Vaughn in. I mean, I think he's just another change of pace guy. I think he's an explosive guy with the football in his hand, and he's not gonna be an every down guy, but at least for this year, with him and Tony Pollard there, that's a lot of speed in the backfield.
He is somebody that I've really enjoyed watching because of his small size and how he fits behind offensive linemen. Like he uses it to his advantage. He's very open about talking about his size and where he kind of stands at the NFL level. And he's a tough running back. Like he is not afraid to pass block. Of course, by his size, naturally he has great leverage on everybody. So it's somebody, and you look at his production, his carries at the college level. Like he wasn't hurt a lot. He was durable. He was a great durable back and, took a lot of carries and showed that he could kind of maintain being like a lead guy if he needed. So I think it's an intriguing name and maybe he presents a little bit more special teams ability, maybe on kickoff. And just keep Kavontae Turpin as a return specialist, but we'll see about that. So as it stands, we did, and I'll do like a little bit of a recap right now. We have Miles Murphy, who we picked in the first round, Steve Avila in the second, Michael Wilson in the third, and Deuce Vaughn in the fourth. I think when you look at the first two picks, that's cake, that's money,
Yeah,
and everything else after that is sort of just icing on the cake.
exactly.
It doesn't look absolutely beautiful for rounds 3 and 4, but it provides depth at positions of need and keeps it in play where if somebody like they needed to move on from Jalen Tolbert next year, Michael Wilson can step in that role. If Brandon Cooks moved on next season, then they have Michael Wilson. If Tony Pollard doesn't come back, Deuce Vaughn is somebody that they can kind of incorporate. So I think right now, as it stands, rounds 1 through 4, it's looking pretty good.
Yeah, it's solid. And like you said, I'm not sitting here and, there's some people not here, but just in general that like may reach a little bit. I like this guy, or, maybe there's a need that I feel like I want to fill now. It's like, no, let's let the board fall to us organically. Let's see what we have here presented and let's make a educated guess on what we think is going to happen.
So, also as it stands, we have addressed out of the 4 picks, 3 of them are offense. I personally feel that that's the way that the draft will go for the Cowboys, similar to what they did in 2021 when Dan Quinn stepped in, where they did the majority of their picks were defense heavy. And I think just to incorporate, Dan Quinn and his style, his system, similarly to Mike McCarthy taking over this time around, I think he might want to get guys that fit the West Coast style, what his offense looks like. So again, I think that this is something that lines up. Anything on defense, offense, we're in round 5 right now. I don't know if it's too early to take the best kicker available, but I know that's something that the Cowboys, like we talked about, need to address.
Yeah, I'm not trying to force anything, but I'd be interested to see where we're at, grade wise from linebacker, right? I talked
Okay.
about that being something that, there is some young talent in the linebacker room for the Cowboys here, but I'd be intrigued to see kind of who's sitting there. It looks like it'd be a reach at this point, to try to get any of these guys. I like Ventrell Miller. I think he can play. Cam Jones is interesting, but I might go back to the best players available and kind of see there before I force a need there for any of those guys.
Yeah, that's. I was gonna say if the linebacker from Alabama, Tuoto, it's a very unique last
Yeah.
name. He's a linebacker that I would be interested in the later rounds. But so let's see where we're at. A few safeties are on the board, a position where the Cowboys don't have a safety locked up. After this year, besides Donovan Wilson, you look at Jaron Curse is on the last year of his deal. Same with Malik Hooker. Israel Mukwamo is going to be due pretty soon, so that's a position as well. Let's see, Keaton Mitchell, the running back from East Carolina.
Purely board. I mean, just looking at the board here, Anthony Johnson's sitting there at, ranked as the 69th best player. Like you said, safety is one of those positions where I wasn't really worried too much about it. Like you said, there are eventually gonna be some issues with that with some of these guys coming back. But if you lock in Anthony Johnson, it may not be an immediate impact here in 2023, but you might have a guy that you really like in 2024 and on. So I might think about it just based on a value pick here.
Well, and you look at special teams too. The Cowboys need
Right.
some help there, and if this is somebody that can provide some special teams help, I think that's something that the Cowboys in the fifth round, they've had success in the later rounds, getting a safety in the fifth or sixth round to develop and kind of be a guy that can kind of fill in these roles. So, if that's where you want to go, I'm not going to fight you on it either.
Yeah, let's lock it in.
All right, cool. So let's see. So with the last two picks, we still need a linebacker and a kicker based off of the three needs. Now, again, not having to force anything. I know another position is, of course, quarterback. It seems like the Cowboys are really trying to hunt some sort of backup quarterback that they can develop. They did a lot of work on Aiden O'Connell, Clayton Tune, Max Duggan. I'm sure if we took a look at the board, those guys would be gone. But is that something that right now in the sixth it would interest you, or you think that stick with Cooper Rush, Will Greer, maybe undrafted free agency, something pops up?
If the board fell a little differently, right? If I was able to attack some of these like needs, like I said, linebacker is something I'm probably going to look at next. If I was able to attack that organically and kind of handle some of these situations, I may be more inclined to take what I would feel as like a luxury pick, right?
Yeah,
Like Cooper Rush is in the fold, for this year. And if we draft somebody that beats out Cooper Rush, that'd be interesting. But I feel
yeah.
like we have a situation where if Dak goes down, hopefully he doesn't. Cooper Rush is going to be the guy to come in. So I don't know if I want to use valuable resources on a third string quarterback, at least for this season. You could do that next year. You can do that undrafted. Even, Will Greer is an intriguing piece there. So I'm probably not as high on drafting a quarterback right now as probably say somebody else maybe.
So I want to see defensive line of a interior depth. Chris Rodriguez out of Kentucky is somebody that I just started watching recently. Very good balance when it comes to running after contact. I saw a lot of highlights of him being able to just barrel through linebacker safeties. A really intriguing prospect. You also have Mo Ibrahim as well, the running back out of Minnesota. I was just mixing in some defensive line here. You of course have a fullback here in Hunter Lipke, but we'll see what happens with that position with Mike McCarthy. But any other position that you want to take a look at?
Yeah, let's get to linebacker real quick. I know we looked at it earlier, but this may be the time where you're like, all right, let's kind of at least get one in the hold here. It's the it may not happen organically here. So, let's go back to the best players available real quick if you don't mind.
No. And you know what? I think with the linebacker class, how it stands, it feels like that if the Cowboys on draft day had to address it, it would either be maybe a first round with like a Drew Sanders or maybe second round if he falls like a Jack Campbell, if they like that sort of traditional linebacker, a Dayon Henley. But outside of like the top depth of this class, it seems like afterwards it just drops off and you're banking on traits, you're banking on people being there that you can hopefully develop. But where it stands with the Cowboys in this particular scenario doesn't look too good right now.
Yeah, and that kinda leads me to say, like, all right, we are addressed wide receiver. I feel pretty good about it. I'm looking at Jonah there. Jonah, I don't wanna butcher, is it Taval?
Tavai.
Yeah, Tavai. It looks like, I mean, it's small on my screen, so it could have been
Yeah.
an L or an I. I took a shot there. So I think Jonah Tavai, I've seen some of his film, and I think he's an intriguing piece in the middle there. So I might, again, I'm looking towards value, and it's a position that it couldn't hurt to get a little more depth there. So I think I would lock that in.
All right, let's do it. And you figure Jonathan Hankins is brought back on a 1-year deal. That doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be back with the Cowboys long term. You don't know what you're going to get from Neville Gallimore in a contract year if he wants to be re-signed. And then outside of that, you just have Osa and then Quinton Bohanna. And even then, Quinton Bohanna was in and out of the lineup. So it's definitely a position of need. And just like the Bohanna pick, if you can get somebody that's late in the draft that you can just bet on the traits. That's the 6th round here. We're now in round 7. You want to bet on traits. Rico Gathers was not a guy anybody expected the Cowboys to pick. They were hoping just betting on the basketball traits, which didn't pan out. It was a cool pick at the time, but I think in the 6th round you're not really expecting much from these guys.
No, not at all. And so, interestingly, right now that we sit here and I look at this board, Troy Brown is sitting there as a linebacker that I'm intrigued by. But we had talked about kicker. If some of the top tier kickers are there, I'd be interested in the 7th round. It's because if one of these best guys are there, he's probably not going to make it to an undrafted situation. So
Yeah.
it might. I mean, look at Jake Moody, Ethan Evans. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I'd be curious to see what you think here. I mean, ultimately, I know it's my decision here, but what do you think about the kickers here?
So when we did our live mock draft on the roundtable 2 weeks ago that I hosted, we had this same scenario where it was between Max Duggan and Jake Moody, and Brandon Clements was banging on the table for Moody. He said we need to address kicker. It's something that the Cowboys need to do. If Moody's there in the 7th round, like you just mentioned, why fight for him in undrafted free agency? I threw a chaos wrench into the mix, and Howman and Chris Halling, or Halling rather, they wanted Max Duggan. And so I was the deciding vote. So we went with Duggan. But I think kicker here, I know Chad Ryland was recently mocked in Chad Reuter's 7th round mock draft on NFL.com. He gave him to the Cowboys. He's a really good kicker. I look at these Big Ten guys that kicked in the outdoor elements. Like for me, that plays a huge factor. If the Cowboys want to get this draft and develop guy at kicker, you want a guy that has proven to not only have success in big games like Moody has, but you also want somebody who's kicked in the elements, has done, a lot more than just kicking indoors. And I know the Cowboys play indoors, but when you think about January football, when you think about February football, like the Cowboys need a kicker, not only to be in the clutch, but to kick in the elements. We saw what happened where the turf was a little off in Tampa Bay. Brett Maher just completely crumbled. So I think Moody's a solid pick here. I think when you look at the big board just in general, I mean, you have Troy Brown, like you mentioned, but the Cowboys have done such a great job of getting undrafted free agents at linebacker that they develop. I think that Jake Bobo is an interesting guy at wide receiver. Mo Ibrahim is still here for running back. But again, we have Deuce Vaughn, D Winters, an intriguing guy from to me, kicker's like the obvious because you don't want to fight for somebody in undrafted free agency. And even like if you look at tight end, Braden Willis, somebody that they had interest in, but like even then, that's not really an intriguing spot right now.
Yeah, I mean, I look at the board here and I kind of look at the position value in the sense that, like, okay, cool, we can get a Max Duggan. We could probably get like a 5th linebacker, somebody that we can hope to have some special team success, or we can bring in one of the top tier kickers in the 7th round and not play games, right?
Yeah.
Like, because you're drafting when you draft a kicker and hopefully all things work out, because you drafted him, he's now a starter, right? You got to look at this kicker as a starter, somebody that's going to impact games like deeply. Like Jake Moody or a 7th round linebacker to me isn't as hard of a conversation as maybe some other people would think it is. So, I mean, for me, Jake Moody, get in there and he can have a kicking battle. And hopefully, because he's a 7th rounder, he can go out there and win that.
Awesome. So we're locking in Moody.
Let's do it.
The last kicker that the Cowboys drafted, was that David Bueller?
Ah, man, that's a good question. I know he's wearing gloves and I know he was a tough guy, but that's about
Yeah,
it.
it's like they need to find somebody, I think, and reportedly Brian Broaddus has talked about this, that from people that he knows inside the building, John Fossil has a plan. Whether that's somebody that he wants to get in the draft, whether it's a veteran free agent, there is a plan at kicker, even though that they haven't addressed it. It seems like that they don't have a plan. There is a little bit of chaos to the madness going on right now. So taking a look at the grade, I like seeing just the top part. It looks pretty good right now. And I think if memory serves, Howman, I think, got either a B or a B plus, B minus. I know Mike, I think, got the B range. So far, so good for the draft. Of course, we got Miles Murphy in the 1st round, Steve Avila, Michael Wilson, Deuce Vaughn. A lot of A's and B's here, man. I'm very happy with how this turned out. Anthony Johnson, Jonah Tavai, Jake Moody, overall an A grade. And I think the first two picks are something that we were very happy with. But overall, was there a pick that stood out to you where it was at the moment of this mock draft that you just said this is just too good to be true?
I think that's what I had with the feeling with Anthony Johnson and Jonah Tavai. Like those are two. I mean, obviously it shows here with A plus. Like the board is gonna,
Obviously, right?
yeah. Well, it's gonna reward you for doing the best player available, finding a situation that, hey, this may not be here, and this is why it's a good grade because you necessarily weren't looking for that. It just looked for you in this situation, so it found you. And I love the situation there where like, okay, Miles Murphy probably isn't like the first round need here in this team, but I wouldn't put him on the CD Lamb level of like, oh my god, this guy dropped. But you probably weren't thinking that he had a chance for him, and if you can get him at 26, you feel really good about that.
Absolutely. So we got a A grade from PFF. What is the grade that you give yourself? I mean, you can go A plus, like go all the way if you want, but I mean, it's tough to beat an A grade, and especially when the computer gives you the A grade. We know AI is a big thing right now. You don't want to fight with the robots. So I mean, if they say it's A, I think that's a great call. But what do you think? How it graded out for you?
I think it's a B because I think I would have liked to go somewhere different than defensive end in the first round. I would have loved to see that be like a guard or, maybe like I said, a wide receiver. I know tight end's trendy right now. I'm not big on the tight end, but like if it was just so like obvious, like, hey, I can't, pass this guy up, or it's just a generational type thing, which people love throwing that word around. I feel like it could have went a little differently in the front end. And then I would have loved to address a linebacker early. It just didn't present itself. So, I'm going to sit here and say that the mock or the AI was a little more friendly to me than I probably will to myself. So give me a B.
I like it. And honestly, if the draft ends up this way, everybody's doing mocks right now. I know there'll probably be a few that come out either maybe even between you or I this week where you kind of just put a bow on the season. Once it gets this close, it's almost like it can't be here soon enough. Like we've done all the work, we've seen all the tape for the most part. We're going to have a lot of draft coverage on Blogging the Boys. But at this point, it's just you want it to be here. You want to open up the presents, see who the new Cowboys are going to be. We'll see what happens with the jerseys for the offensive players if they do the single digit route. That'll certainly be interesting. But, when you get new players on your favorite team, it's just an exciting thing to think about.
I totally agree. Like this is I mean, it's not like a depressing, situation here, but we haven't seen our team in a competitive situation since, January. So I'm excited to root for the Cowboys for something that's like tangible. Like, okay, like this is the guy I want. This is the guy we need. Let's go get him. And the draft really brings out that fan in you because we've been students of the game and I'm ready to just fan out a little bit.
Awesome. And, I know the handle's on the screen right now. I don't know if you have the verification or if it got removed from you because you're a legacy guy. But where can people follow you on Twitter, Tony?
So it's Tony underscore at Twitter. It's the same thing on Instagram, everything else, social media. Is I try to throw the underscore in there just to make it easy for myself.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Well, again, you can follow me on Twitter at Brandon is right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another Blogging the Boys 2023 mock draft. Be sure to read not only all of my work, but of course, all of Tony's work and everybody's work at bloggingtheboys.com. And also rate and review all the podcasts that we have going on. Again, with draft week coming on, there might be a few surprise guests that pop on to give their 2 cents before the draft. A lot of debate on where the Cowboys should go. So definitely check all those out before we do all of our cranking out content for the draft weekend. So for Tony Catalina, I am Brandon Loree. Just remember, everybody, no matter what happens in the draft, go Cowboys.